Welcome to our 59th podcast. Today we'll be talking about leading through uncertainty with our very special guest, Dr. Jonna Von Thiel. What's the one thing you can do now to effectively lead people through uncertainty? Keep listening to find out. Welcome to Harmonious Workplaces, a podcast about corporate culture, organizational change management, and workplace behavior. Harmonious Workplaces was started by independent consultants Rich Cruz, Ben Kleinman, and Cheryl Volpe to explore, challenge, and build on various organizational culture and change management concepts. It's a blend of theory and practice based on their personal and professional experiences working with companies of all sizes across various industries. If you own a business, lead a team, want new ideas about the corporate environment, or just want to listen to a group of consultants talking about how to make work more enjoyable, we invite you to sit back, relax, and dive in with us to Harmonious Workplaces. Hello, Harmonious Workplaces listeners. Welcome back to our podcast. We are excited to be talking about some really cool stuff today. My name is Rich Cruz. I'm an organizational development consultant. And as usual, I'm joined by my co-host, Cheryl Volpe. Hey, Cheryl.
Hey, Rich. Hi, everyone.
And Ben Kleinman.
Hey, everyone.
And I am super duper excited to have one of my professors from Purdue,
Yay.
Dr. Jonna Von Thiel. How are you this morning?
I am fabulous. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, I'm so happy to have you here. So I think you were with my capstone. Is that right? That led me through that?
That is correct. Your final course. It was the gateway to your graduation.
Yes, that's right. Well, thank you so much. And so I'm going to refer to you as Dr. J because that's what I'm used to.
Absolutely.
Right on. So we thought we'd talk a little bit today about leading through uncertainty. And before we do that, can you just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about Dr. J.
Sure. Well, I actually feel very fortunate to have gained it's almost scary to say, over 20 years of experience in leadership development, organizational development, through coaching, facilitation, but all grounded in that academic foundation, simply because I'm a lifelong learner, right? So being able to teach, I have access to all the research that's out there. But I am truly passionate about creating a space for people to explore their own potential and then to use those research-backed skills for them to use throughout their journey to be the best version of themselves. So I wake up every morning excited to do what we call work every single day.
Beautiful. I'll tell you what, I remember when I graduated, and it was like a week after I graduated, and I didn't have access to any of the libraries anymore. And I freaked out. I'm like, 2.5 years and all this stuff's gone. And now I'm an adjunct again. And I'm like, I have access to all this. So.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
It's like losing a limb. I mean, it was, I remember it. So just
That's fast. A week?
It was pretty quick.
Dang.
It was fast. But Dr. J, thank you. Rich and I had our beginnings of our business during your capstone, I'm sure. So I had the honor and the pleasure of being in that same class. So thank you for that. And thank you for this.
Yeah, absolutely.
For those of you listening on the podcast, not watching on YouTube, there are just smiles from ear to ear on Rich and Cheryl's face. They're like totally beaming that Dr. J is on the show. So hopefully you can feel the vibe, feel the love.
That's right.
And now we can ask Dr. J all sorts of hard questions.
Right. And it won't affect our grade.
Exactly.
Yes. My GPA remains as is. Okay, cool. So here we go. First question that we have. So when we think about times of uncertainty, right? So we're going to go to trait theory. What psychological traits do leaders most need to cultivate and why? So
yeah, this is an interesting question. I'm sorry.
Since I'm not grounded in trait theory, can you give just the brief byline of what trait theory is?
Rich or Cheryl, do you guys want to do that?
Oh, I
Oh,
like
boy.
that. Calling on
Oh,
people in
the-
class. Cold calling.
Tim's
Woo!
turn.
well, I think this is an interesting question, actually, right? Because when you think about traits, is it something that you can
Mhm.
cultivate? Is it something that you have, right? So and it's not just like one. I mean, there's several different theories on traits, right? But
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. So originally, right, it's all based on kind of innate characteristics or traits, right, that someone is born with. And so originally the foundational theories of, what is the characteristic that someone has that helps them be a successful leader, and, thinking that it was something that somebody was born with as opposed to something that someone can create. And as obviously time has developed and more research has come out within leadership, that we have found that there are obviously natural innate things that some people are better at than others, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't put the time, energy, and effort into developing certain traits and ultimately the skills of those traits that come along with it that's going to help us, especially as leaders. So when we think about, right, those specific traits that we can cultivate to help us during times of uncertainty, we think about adaptability, right? Because change is the only thing that we know is certain, right?
that's right.
Um,
Yeah,
change is going to happen. I actually was talking to my 12-year-old the other day about it. Like, that is the only guarantee. And then he was like, well, what about taxes? And I was like, that's for another conversation. But change is something that it's going to happen whether we like it or not. So being able to have the skill set, being adaptable, really is super important. I think resilience is a term that has come up, in the last probably 5 years or so, really, especially with just the pandemic and, all of the things that everybody dealt with. But when we think about a leader and facing, the future of the unknown, of there are going to be obstacles, there will always be obstacles. And so how do we help ourselves or equip our leaders with the skill sets to be resilient, and then turn around and help their people to be resilient? And I think with both of those, adaptability and resiliency, I think the foundational, if we want to call it trait or skill or whatever competency, whatever you want to call it, is really stemmed on curiosity, right? I think the more that we are curious about how things are going to change, the more we're curious about how we experience whatever it is that we're encountering, how we can help those around us, or what is it going to look like, right? When we start becoming more curious, then we actually give ourselves more data, more information, right? To be able to adapt to the change easier, to be able to be more resilient, because our brain is getting more data, right, to process so that we can make sense of the uncertainty that's before us, right? So I think, when it comes to being a leader, and we're all leaders in our own life, so regardless of whether you're a people leader or you are a individual contributor in an organization, there are things that we can do. I think reflection is a great one. If something didn't go as well as you thought it did, take a moment and reflect upon what happened. What were those emotions? What were those, things that you wish you would have done differently? And then figure out, okay, what is it that I can be more aware of going into those situations? And then the more that we practice that, the more that we get better at it in those situations, and the more it becomes natural for us. For those of us that it may not be an innate trait that we were quote born with.
sure.
So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
Well,
it's
Yeah,
great. And
that's
I
great.
just want to say the underlying principles with keeping that curiosity alive is engagement and motivation, right? And those are foundational. And that's why employee engagement from leaders is so important, to keep that curiosity vibrant, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
yeah. When I think of, oh, go ahead, Ben.
Oh, I was just going to ask, Doc, when all of that makes perfect sense. Do you ever encounter folks who feel like they just don't need that, and they say, I know exactly what I'm doing. they're not, maybe they're a bull in a china shop. Maybe they're just a little bit blindsided, or we've talked a lot about narcissism, and Cheryl's done a lot of great work on some of those darker traits. How do you convince those folks to step back and say, maybe there's value in pausing, asking some questions, listening to others, being a little more curious, and thinking about others who need a little bit of that sort of safety?
Yeah, that's a great topic. I think we could talk a whole episode just on that topic.
Okay.
There's
Sorry.
several things that come to mind as you were asking the question. I think we all know, right? Individuals who tend to have that self-perception, they are not going to change because you tell them that they need to change, right? So they really have to understand what is the consequence that's going to occur if they don't change. And sometimes they have to experience the consequence, right? So that's when you have a leader that gets fired, right? And they're like, I don't understand. I was a great leader. My numbers were great, yet their engagement scores were in
horrible.
the tank, and their entire team was scared to say anything, right? But their numbers were good. So sometimes those individuals actually need to experience that consequence, and then it's like their world is turned upside down, and then they have this like, okay, maybe I need to approach things differently, right? The other thing, I don't know if you guys have read the book Insights by Tasha Irwich.
Oh, I haven't, but now it's on my reading list.
It's a great book. It's a great book. She has done lots of research on self-awareness. There's a Harvard Business Review article that kind of summarizes her research, and the book is fabulous because it talks about the research, but it also gives practical tools. And she coined a term, which I love it, and I use it way too much, is self-delusional. So those individuals who are self-aware, or they claim to be self-aware, such as typically a narcissist will be, they're actually self-delusional, right? They have this delusional perspective of how they show up to others and how they interact with others. And you guys know, right? Emotions are much stronger than logical thinking. And when someone is emotionally connected to their identity of this is who I perceive myself to be, it is going to be much stronger than, Rich, you trying to tell me that I'm not showing up in the way that I believe that I'm showing up, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to think that you're wrong, and I'll probably tell you that you're wrong.
Right.
But until that person experiences the consequence of their behavior or recognizes what or how severe those consequences could be, there's no motivation to change their behavior or to break down that delusion and have a true perception of how they're showing up to others.
Sure. It's interesting. Yesterday, I had a conversation with somebody who owns a culture consultancy, right? And one of the things that I took away from this conversation was that you can tell people to do it this way or that way, or put policies and procedures already and all that, but unless you change the way fundamentally people think and feel, it's not going to stick, right? I thought that was, does that track with what you were just
Absolutely.
saying?
Well, I mean, there's a connection between, that's what psychology is, mind and body, right? And emotions really do drive all that we are and really make us human, right? Like that emotions distinguish us between, right? So being able to understand how emotions play an impact in behavior is huge and really can be a key for a leader to be successful.
Right on.
And it
Great.
leads to all of the conversations around EQ and EI and, that constant dilemma of, I want to be authentic when I show up, but you need to regulate. Well, I don't want to regulate, then I'm not who I'm supposed to be, right? But that balance and that skill set of emotional intelligence is key to that whole
Absolutely.
discussion.
Yeah. Before we take a break, we need to take a break real quick. But before we do, I have to point out that Cheryl today brought up the first acronyms.
Oh my
EQ
gosh, I
and
did.
EI.
Ding, 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 ding.
That's a big thing around here, Dr. J.
Lots of acronyms.
All the acronyms.
Yeah.
It's just battle of acronyms and academic theory soup.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
We,
Yeah.
we drown in it sometimes.
Rich,
I do feel like EQ and EI are almost mainstream. So like, does it really count as an acronym? I don't know.
It counts.
It
And
counts.
she was
Oh.
the first one.
we still have to explain IO every time. So you're right,
That's
though.
right.
EQ has definitely surpassed IO.
Yes,
Right
for
on.
sure. Yeah.
Well, why don't we do this? We're going to take a quick break. When we come back to kind of talk about how do we fundamentally change this, right? Can we talk a little bit about coaching?
Absolutely.
Right on. Okay. We'll be right back. Dysfunctional organizational cultures and poorly managed transformations can devastate employee morale and motivation, leading to disengaged employees, poor work quality, and the loss of your best people. The impacts to your organization include high costs, low productivity, and wasted resources. At Harmonious Workplaces, our purpose is to help you build the best workplace possible. We are advisors applying proven organizational development and industrial organizational psychology methodologies to help you become your best organization. We are doers, using time-tested principles to help you execute organizational change initiatives smoothly and successfully. To discover how Harmonious Workplaces can impact your organization, visit www.harmoniousworkplaces.com and book a free 30-minute information session with one of our consultants today. Again, that's www.harmoniousworkplaces.com. And we're back. So we have been talking with Dr. J and talking specifically about leading through times of uncertainty. We talked a little bit about traits, and we talked about that we have to change the way that people think and feel in order to make things happen, right? So can executive coaching help leaders through that adaptability and resilience that you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually tell my team, right, to be a good friend, you should be a good coach. I think coaching skills are something that we don't tap into enough. Coaching really can play a transformational role in not only building adaptability and resilience, right, for anybody's life, but especially for a leader when faced with uncertainty inside of an industry.
Mm-hmm.
I think executive coaching helps develop those, internal resources, change the mindset, or validate the mindset that allows us to navigate, right, adversity or change, or look at things from a different perspective. I think coaching allows us to actually have cognitive flexibility, right? So the ability to shift between perspectives. So we typically get down that, narrow path of the way that we see it, but having somebody else question us and allowing us to maybe take a step back and looking at things a little bit differently may challenge, right, our fixed narratives that we have, and hopefully invite kind of that broader thinking, or really seeing it from another's perspective. I think as we talked about emotions, right, coaching can help with that emotional agility, helping leaders understand what emotion are they actually experiencing, right?
Right.
I know I when I teach on emotional intelligence, and I tell people, knowing the difference between being mad, angry, agitated, and aggravated is a very, very minor thing. But when you're able to distinguish the difference between those four emotions, it's huge.
Mm-hmm.
It's huge because, right, as we experience an emotion, the intensity level is going to determine how connected we are. And sometimes when we're at that higher intensity level with that emotion, we can't see clearly, right? We don't see situations in a light that we would see if our emotional intensity was lower. So having someone ask us questions through coaching, through different coaching techniques, potentially allows us to lower that level of intensity, and we're able to see things a little bit clearer, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think, coaching also helps us, recognize, sometimes the small wins, and we don't see that. All we see is like, here's the long-term goal and I haven't gotten there yet. And I just feel, beat down, or, things change every time I turn around, but yet there's been some small things. And as we tell our story, an outside person can be like, oh, but wait, you just did this. This is amazing. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think, coaching can really enable leaders to build their own coaching capabilities as well, right? The more that we go through that process of coaching, the more that we will start to coach others and even coach ourselves through situations. So that skill set is transferable. As we're receiving it, we're able to coach others.
Makes sense.
Great.
Now, when you talk about coaching, um, I guess is that my experience has been helping somebody to get to the answer themselves, is like,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not just like telling them, like dictating to them, right? Like how do you do that, if you don't mind? I know that's like probably a whole course, but
Well, it all goes back to asking questions, and asking, let me rephrase that. It goes back to asking great questions. So there's an article out there, and I can send it to you guys, and it's about asking great questions, right? How to elevate your question asking, because I think Coaching for Performance is a book. If you hadn't read that one, it reviews the GROW model, which is a universal coaching model that's out there, but they have some very good examples on how do you actually coach someone for them to discover. And one of the simplest examples that they give inside there is throwing like a baseball, right, coach, right? And the pitch is thrown and somebody hits the ball and they don't hit it. And depending upon how you ask the player the question is going to determine the answer that they get, right? And if you say, well, why didn't you hit the ball? Right? The player's going to get defensive immediately. But if you're like, okay, why weren't you looking at the ball? And they were like, well, I was looking at the ball, right? But you need to get down to what fundamentally were they thinking? What fundamentally were they processing before, they swung the bat or whatever.
sure.
And so it's asking them, so what were you looking at, right? And having them think, right? So the best coaches ask the great questions that require the coachee to think. If we can get people to think, then they're going to discover. It may take some time, right? But the better our questions are during the coaching process, the easier it is going to be for that person to come to the answer themselves, or even elevate the answer that they actually arrive at.
Makes sense. Sure.
That's great. And it goes back to that accessing your own emotions and that like mental athleticism to get to that answer yourself through practice and the great questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Doc, you found that through coaching and more increasing someone's self-awareness and those types of practices, that people become a little bit better and more innately able to have that mental agility, mental flexibility, maybe to step down themselves during a heated situation, or to be better at recognizing small wins without being prompted, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
That's great.
awareness really is the foundation to growth, right? Is we don't know what we don't know, and we can't grow into something that we want to be if we don't know where we're at currently. So self-awareness is the foundation. Now there are lots of steps, right, that get somebody to that, self-aware leader. So somebody can be very self-aware, but choose not to do anything about it. That's a whole nother conversation. That's a whole nother podcast, right? All of those things. But I do think self-awareness really is that key that can elevate, right, individuals to get to where they want to go.
Right on. Now, bringing this back to uncertainty, right? So coaches, when they're, or leaders, when they have to effectively coach somebody, they're also in this state of uncertainty, right? So how do they remain grounded and be able to help somebody else when they themselves are going through this?
It really is staying what I like to say, in the moment, right? Staying in the moment, but just being curious about the other person, simply leading with curiosity. If a coach has a defined agenda, like I'm going to help this person see what they've done wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that's the defined agenda, then that coach is going to be subconsciously driven by the questions they ask towards that ultimate goal that they've already established that they're going to try to do with this client, right? Whereas if they are stay in the moment and they just become curious about the person, and those questions are stemmed from that level of curiosity, then there's going to be so much more that surfaces that the coach probably didn't even know or recognize. And, I mean, when you get people thinking and you get people really, exploring what's inside, there it's amazing what actually comes out, to be perfectly honest with you, and that the other person doesn't even realize, right, that this may be something that's causing, right, the challenge for them that's not even related to the situation that they're currently facing.
Sure.
And the parallels to clinical practice, I have been doing that as well, and they are interlaced with the organizational psychology. There is someone in front of you that needs to be asked the great questions so that they can reveal their own path to themselves, get to their own answers. And if you take them there too fast, then that healing and that learning can't happen, right? It's all
Absolutely.
connected. Yeah. Yeah. Foundations.
Before we hit the next break, because we got one more break coming up here, I do want to ask you, like, what are some common pitfalls, some mistakes, or whatever you want to call them, right? That, and I'm probably opening up something that I shouldn't open up before a break,
It's a good
but
teaser.
it could be. But like, what are just like some things that you've noticed in your career, in your research, that have been that have not they've been counterproductive. Let's put it that way.
As far as coaching, is
Coaching,
that
like especially in times of these uncertain times.
uncertainties?
Yeah.
Well, I think we've all either experienced it or have seen someone, right? The analysis paralysis. I
Ooh,
think
sure.
that is a huge one, right? I think earlier I was talking about getting as much data as we can so that our brain can make sense of the world around us, right? Some of us require much more data than others in order to make a decision, but when times are really uncertain or there's a lot of ambiguity is one of those things that some people have a hard time with, then it's that fear of making the wrong move, right? Or if I do this, right, then what is the next negative thing that's going to happen, or what's the what is that going to cause that now I'm going to have to deal with, right? So that inability to make a decision or make a choice of, okay, I'm going to do XYZ and then I'll deal with the consequences of whatever that is. It's much easier to say, well, I just won't do anything, you just tell me what to do and I will do it, right?
Right.
And then the opposite is when leaders feel the stress or become overwhelmed, sometimes they can revert to micromanaging, right? They can revert to, okay, I must be in control of every single thing that happens, right? And so I'm going to now start, telling Cheryl what she needs to do with her job that she's been doing for many years, right? Or I'm going to have to review everything she does because of this uncertainty. And so we kind of lose sight of what is that long-term vision, and we're so focused in on the short term of what is happening now, that we have those coping mechanisms, right? That goes back to our survival instincts of, okay, how do I control the situation in order to survive in this moment, as opposed to taking a step back and looking at okay, how is this going to help me get to where our long-term goals are?
Sure. Sure. What? Just real quick. So I remember talking through like the ocean, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, right? I think I got that right. So it seems like you're talking a lot about from going back to traits a little bit. you got to be open and really exercise the openness. And the neuroticism part is, the opposite of that is emotional stability, right?
Hmm.
That those might arguably be two of the most important factors in what we need to exercise as leaders. Does that make sense?
It does. Hmm.
I remembered something from grad school. Okay.
Yeah, look at that.
Cool. All right. Well, let's do this. Let's take a quick break, and then when we come back, let's just leave the listeners with what can they do. Uh, let's do that. Okay. We'll be right back. Meet Hermie the HR Hermit Crab. Laugh, learn, and lead better with Hermie. Hermie is here to tackle workplace madness with heart and humor from Harmonious Workplaces. He's perfect for HR pros, leaders, and change makers. Hermie teaches workplace lessons through cartoons and is great for team discussions and workshops. Get your copy on Amazon now. www.hermiehrhermitcrab.com. Again, that's hermiehrhermitcrab.com. And we're back. So we have been talking to Jonna Von Thiel. I did it again. So sorry. Anyway, so we've been talking to Dr. J here about leading through uncertainty, right? And as we were in the break, Ben, you had a good question to kind of bring a lot of what we had been talking about back to how the curiosity and then of course how do we develop leaders. So shoot, go.
Oh, it's on me. Okay.
That's all
I thought you were
you.
going to ask my question. I was like, oh,
No,
cool.
man,
I'll
of
sit
course
back,
I'm
grab my
not.
coffee,
That's your job.
put the cinnamon roll in the oven. I was thinking a little bit about what we were talking about kind of earlier, and Dr. J, you were sharing about how executive coaches can help a leader understand more about him or herself, and understand then that they can be a vehicle for transmitting some of those qualities to people on their staff and making their own leadership a coaching kind of leadership. And I was wondering how we might be able to expand that throughout the organization or an organization, so that the organization builds up this muscle of, we become a curious organization. We become an organization that thinks of itself as adaptable and resilient and sort of question friendly or curious forward, if those terms make sense. And how we do that. And then the bonus question would be if there's any way to scale that for large organizations, because typically I think of executive coaching as that one-to-one relationship. And so how do we do a one-to-many?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I think it really stems with leadership development inside of an organization. We all know, people don't leave organizations, they leave managers, right? Or leave leaders. And so being able to ensure that organizations provide that development for their leaders inside the organization. And historically, right, leadership has been developed for predictability, right? In business environments, we want our leaders to produce, and we want them to have those skill sets in order to produce. Where now, right, change is the topic and change is here to stay. And it's not so much training leaders what they need to know. It's like we need to train leaders with the skill sets of how to make sense of complexity. So creating developmental programs that really target that capacity to think strategically, which drives curiosity, right? If you are looking more big picture, if you're looking at a higher elevation, that you're seeing things differently, and then giving them those, skills to kind of make sense of what that information is, right? I think taking them through formal learning, obviously with master classes or scenario planning situations where they're encountering those maybe troubled employees or difficult situations, giving them a safe space to try it out really is helpful in them being able to say, okay, I didn't do it well this time. Let me try it again, so that when they actually do encounter it, they feel a little bit more confident going in to try these skill sets. The other thing to scale, and that I've used inside of our organization, is kind of that concept of social learning. So peer coaching or team coaching. Within a lot of our leadership programs that we have a coaching component to it, which means
Okay.
there are small cohorts. And then there's a simultaneous program that's running that are the coaches. And so we are providing these individuals coaching skill sets that they're actually using on the individuals going through the leadership program. So they're getting coaching skills while they're being coached by peers. So it becomes a norm of coaching's expected. Coaching is something that is just part of the culture, right? And again, having an opportunity to provide feedback. I think feedback is a gift. Anytime you get feedback, whether you think it's horrible feedback, whether it rips your soul apart, the first thing you should say is thank you, because we don't get enough feedback. We don't get enough positive feedback. We don't get enough constructive feedback. So any opportunity that we can provide feedback or receive feedback really is golden. And so creating those programs that enable those skill sets that are practiced to then receive the feedback, they're only going to be set up for more success in the future.
I love this.
That's fantastic.
If I was if I was to construct the Dr. J model of organization, adaptability, and resilience, it seems to me it is this formal learning component with this informal socialization component leading to normative behaviors, and then the results with the feedback loop. Is that?
That was beautifully summed up.
Wow, that was you. It took me through that whole thing in just a couple of seconds here. That was awesome. Thank you.
For those listening on the podcast, now it's Dr. J's turn to have the big ear-to-ear grin because she's so proud of her students. Doctor, it seems like in a lot of contexts I've heard train the trainer, and this is almost like coach the coacher or coach the coachee. Would that be the right? It's about helping other people learn from each other, and I hadn't heard that term social learning, but that's great. And so it's about building that muscle that we are all individual coaches within the organization. And I'm just dying to ask Cheryl about how you have to have a culture of psychological safety for that to become any chance of surviving in a broader organization.
We talk a lot about psychological safety, Dr. J. We just did a webinar last month about it. And I also, and thank you for that, Ben, and also the idea that feedback has to be more frequent. Like you're saying, it has to be more frequent throughout the year. And I think, would you say, Dr. J, that this idea of more frequent feedback is an outcropping or a consequence of the rejection around the 360 processes, right? That 360 feedback process that only happens maybe once a year or twice a year in some companies is not enough to promote the psychological safety on a regular basis, right? People are afraid to speak up and on a regular basis. So it's not a part of the culture except for this one time a year where there's this big corporate process. And the value from that has its ups and downs because of it's not often enough. So welcoming feedback, and especially in a coaching relationship, right? The whole vernacular around coaching makes it more inviting to get that feedback in it rather than it not being expected or welcomed, the coaching aspect on a regular basis in a culture. And then that helps promote psychological safety, which then promotes comfort with ambiguity, innovation, teamwork, mentoring, giving, all those things. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. And, feedback should be a conversation, right? And unfortunately, we have assimilated feedback with these formal feedback processes, right? And even when you do formal 360s, there are people who are reluctant. They're like, well, are they going to be able to identify if I actually provide, even though you tell them it's anonymous, right? And so making a culture or creating a culture that has an environment where feedback is just part of the conversation, where that becomes the norm, that's where you see change actually happen inside of a culture.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, we've just about.
We could keep going for days.
I know, right? I'm like,
So
oh my
many
gosh,
things.
we could just keep going, but
That's the tip of the
but
iceberg.
but now it's come to say goodbye to all our company. No, we're not going to sing that anyway. So, Dr. J, can you, as we wrap up here, can you just tell us how can people get in touch with you, or I'll just kind of a final call to action?
Yeah, how do we sign up for your classes?
Well, please connect with me on LinkedIn. That's number one.
Right on.
You can find me out there. And if you are interested in your graduate education, Purdue Global has some great programs. I'll put a plug out there for them. I would like to just leave everybody with, you can learn anything from anyone in any encounter. And when we are open to learning, that's where curiosity starts to grow, right? So learning is just that seed to curiosity. So start with figuring out what you can learn. At the end of the day, ask yourself, what did I learn today? And it will continue to grow. And then you'll start looking for those things as you encounter others and situations.
Right on.
Great.
When is the book coming out?
Working on it, not quite, not really sure just yet. So we'll see. But I am working on actually launching a podcast. So hopefully that will be coming later this summer. And I hope to have you guys listen in and provide feedback, right? Because I love feedback.
That. Oh my gosh.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great.
I was only kidding about the book, but this is just such great
Yeah.
info. And
Yeah.
whatever we can do to support you and promote you, let us know. Because I'm sure our listeners are just overwhelmed with such great knowledge.
Oh, this was a fantastic episode. Thank you so much for being here. We're
Thank you, guys.
so honored.
Thank you guys so much.
Great. All right. Well, Harmonious Workplaces listeners, we hope you found some really great advice here and information. And until we meet again, make change your friend. Thanks for listening to Harmonious Workplaces. You can find Harmonious Workplaces on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and other streaming platforms. We'd love any feedback on whatever channel you find us on. Please rate, like, and share our podcast with your network, and remember to add Harmonious Workplaces to your list of favorites to get notified about each new episode. To contact Rich or Cheryl, please visit www.workbalanceconsulting.com. To connect with Ben, find him on LinkedIn or visit at www.harborsidestrategy.com.